I think what we might do is move towards talking about the current conversation which is happening, I think, in a lot of our communities now. And I might kick that off with a question which says, why do you think there is such strong resistance to the queer community in Christianity? Another massive question. Maybe I'll give you a moment to...
I'll take a microphone.
To think about that.
Ready to go. Thinking face on. So why is there such resistance to the queer community? Just going to repeat the question to make sure I have it.
Yeah.
Why is there such resistance to the queer community from within Christianity?
In Christianity, yeah.
I think it kind of goes back to what I said before about a cheap understanding of immorality and what Carl was saying about this tradition, like in terms of an excess of lust. So, and even what Keith was saying, that we didn't have a concept of gayness. It doesn't mean people weren't gay. We just didn't talk about it like that. So we tell it's hard to think sometimes, right? Like sometimes we don't really want to think about things. We just want a really easy answer. And I think that we've had years and years of cultural narrative that basically says that being queer is deviant, is immoral, and for a really long time it was illegal. You know, in Tasmania it was still illegal in the mid-90s. When you're, yeah, right? 97. When you're coming out of this kind of context where the political narrative, the cultural narrative is homosexuality is illegal, let's have a conversation about whether we legalize it. When you're having, when you, in people's recent memory, the being gay, like before kind of like the last 20 years, required a lot of, like to be openly gay, I would imagine, I wasn't there in the 70s or the 80s, would take a lot of courage, right? And I think that to be the only places, where you could probably be openly gay were not necessarily always the most respected places. So things kind of get linked up and become synonymous with each other. So, if there's like a dirty, deviant underground club and that's the only place you can be gay, like then in people's minds, you can tell this narrative about being gay as being deviant, about rule breaking. You can connect it to drug taking, to all sorts. You can connect it to promiscuity because you can't get married. So, and we can keep telling these things over and over, which allow us to say the queer community is immoral, is promiscuous, is all these things that we're not. And then you don't have to think about it. I've done that. I know that I've done that in the past. I know that when I grew up, I just found it much easier to think things like, okay, I know there's gay people in the world, but they're not Christians because it doesn't go together. And that was just much easier for me to think like that than to have to actually have to think through how those things actually manifested in people's lives. So I'm not actually judging people who want to latch on to like an easy story. I latch on to easy stories all the time because they're easy. So I think there's a lot of historical narrative, a lot of political narrative that surrounds this that we really need to think about when we're talking about why does the church hate the queer community. And for me, I think that's got a lot to do with it in terms of that if in your mind being gay means being promiscuous or it means whatever, which is not what it means, I hasten to add. But if in your mind that's what you think, then I think it becomes really easy to just dismiss a whole subset of society. I realise that might sound really harsh. I don't mean that in a harsh way.
No. I would add on to that I think the same-sex marriage movement and legalising same-sex marriage, I mean, you see it. We've seen it in the plebiscite, it has this hashtag liberalism, hashtag secularism, hashtag slippery slope. All of that is on the decision for me to marry my partner, who I'm committed to. All of that is on our relationship at the moment. All of that is on us. And I'm like, that's not what I'm about. I want to sit in a church with my minister and say, I want to lay my life down for you and hope to honour you and hope that I can bring the best out in you, that one day you'll be glorified in the next life and have done that the best in this life. You know, I'm not about everything else that's been put on me. And yeah, I agree. That's why there's such a resistance, is because everything is on this. We've put everything on it. And I think as well, the queer theorists would know more about this, but the conversation is at a point generally in society where we need to move forward and we need to change our thinking as well. I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I think just like generally in society, there's a conversation going on about sexuality, about gender, that like we're in at the moment, and we've just gone, you know what? This is the reason. This is the reason that we're losing all of our power over the society. They're going out of the church, and we're losing all of our ability to speak into this space. It's like, no, that's a conversation that is happening. That's a change that's happening in society. And it's not because of me. It's because of that's what's happening. Yeah, and I actually think, to add on to that, I think we are planning to speak a little bit about this, but I think the fact that we don't acknowledge that is really not good from the church. The fact that we don't take the responsibility for our words, for our actions, that we're blaming it on, you know, this one thing, and we're not stepping up to say, okay, this is something that's happening. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond in a Christ-like way? And how are we going to speak wisdom into this? How are we going to speak compassion? How are we going to speak truth? How are we going to get those people back? How are we going to build those relationships instead of doing the exact opposite and just blaming something else?
It's I tried to figure this out I came out when I was 20, and that same year I went to a mid-year conference. I don't know if people are familiar with that part of... This is my introduction to Sydney Anglicanism. And the speaker, whom I won't name at that conference, said to me, said to all of us, over the coming decades, homosexuality is going to be what indulgences were at the period of the Reformation. It will be a litmus test which we can use to tell which Christians are serious about Scripture and which Christians are not serious about Scripture. And that's nearly verbatim. It's 17 years ago, and it was that was like the moment that I was coming out, and I was sitting there going, I'm your litmus test? Me? I'm 20 years old, and I'm an emotional mess, and I have to be your litmus test over this issue. And it puzzled me, because I think... I grew up at a time when the Assemblies of God was having this massive theological battle as to, we'd always been about total abstinence from alcohol. And we were having this discussion that maybe there was some morality in drinking in moderation. And it was a huge battle. Like, until very recently, Assemblies of God pastors actually had to sign that they agreed to abstinence from alcohol, like total abstinence, to be teetotalers. And we changed on a moral issue. And to be honest, nobody heard about it. It just kind of shifted. We talked about it. Do you know what? This moral issue, it's not huge to us anymore, and we'll move on it. And then I think about the way that birth control was an issue in the first half of the 20th century. And the Protestant movements, they slowly eased over and said, okay, no, we can do birth control. And then the Catholics said no, but we didn't rip Christianity in half over that question, but it seems like we're doing it today. And I think that when you said this is about a loss of control, with so many social shifts, with the abolition of slavery, with women getting the vote, there was a sense in which the church had to give its nod before society moved forward. And then in the 90s, we decriminalised sodomy, and the church was not consulted. I think they're angry about that loss of power. Not in a kind of some Machiavellian plotting way, but just in a like, wait a minute, no, we didn't get our say, and that symbolises actually the fact that the power of Christianity over the social institutions of the entire West is gone, and I think that that's deeply scary.
I think the Melbourne Anglican Diocese voted in favour of decriminalisation. Sydney voted against. The other thing to say... Yeah. The other thing to say is that one of the really, really exciting things about the Australian Christians for Marriage Equality and our website, which is almost 2 million hits, is how many young LGBTI, young and old, young and very old, who are wanting to be married, LGBTIQ Christians are speaking. And the more people like Steph and Carl and others speak up and tell us their stories and share with us their wrestling with the scriptures, a change will take place, because we can no longer other. It's not the queer community out there. It's not them over there. It's not the gay lifestyle that we abhor. These are our sons and daughters. These are our children. These are our siblings. And that profound change is going to make a big difference, and is already. And thank you, Steph.
Can I add something before we move on? Just because Steph and Carl were both talking about this loss of control idea, and I'm just going to cheat and read a little extract from an article by a guy called Luke Timothy Johnson. And this was actually written in 2007, so it's 10 years old. And he's writing on homosexuality in the church. And what he said is, in the present crisis in Christian denominations is the present crisis in Christian denominations over homosexuality really about sex? I don't think so. If it were, there would be no particular reason why homosexuals would be singled out for attention. There's more than enough sexual disorder among heterosexuals to fuel moral outrage. Right? The relative, and he then goes on to list a lot in his article. And then he says, and many of them are in the church, right? And the relatively small set of same-sex unions gets singled out for moral condemnation, while the vast pandemic of sexual disorder gets ignored. In my view, this scapegoating of homosexuality has less to do with sex than with perceived threats to the authority of Scripture and the teaching of the authority of the church. And I just want to kind of sit on that.
Thank you, Rosie.